Hey, Nirvana Mama here, and this is Hairbrush Poetry Jam. And today I'm going to read to you a poem I wrote called Cracks in the Wood. I wrote this poem recently. It's about grief. Last week, I took the week off for a few days, and I had two funerals to go to. We had two deaths in the family, my uncle and my grandfather. So it was a very emotional week, and I wrote this poem. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. Cracks in the Wood. What happens when a tree dies? Does it make a sound? Does it feel death's door? Does it wish it had more leaves, or newer roots, or smoother bark? What happens to the tree next door? Does it wilt, or crack, or split? Does it mourn the squirrels that used to come over, or long for the birds' return? What happens when a tree dies? Does the forest know? Does the creek weep as it spreads news of the loss? What happens to the soil? What happens to the cave nearby? Do the trees around it cry? Does anything happen to the sky? And why don't we know? The feel of death's door, the grain of its surface, the cracks in the wood. Why don't we know the dirge of the forest? Okay, so sometimes I write poetry to help me make sense of my past and experiences I've been through. Sometimes I write poetry to express my dreams for the future and visualize the direction I want my life to go. And sometimes I write poetry to process things in the present that I'm currently experiencing. So this week, I wanted to show you that present day process because I did have a very emotional week. It was a lot. We did a double visitation and then a funeral the next day and then another funeral the next day. And I had a lot of support. We had a lot of support. It was really amazing how many people expressed their sympathies and showed up and wanted to do anything that they could to help. And it was great to reconnect with a lot of people I hadn't seen in a long time. I was talking to somebody that, said that it was just, they couldn't imagine how much it was to go through. And I said, yeah, it's really too much to process all at once. And the amount of time that the events were taking place. So, grief is definitely a process, and double grief is a double process. So I'm doing what I can, thinking about reflecting on my relationships with those family members and the impact they had on my life. And for that, it's time for combing through. We're detangling my life here on Combing Through, and today I want to read to you a tribute that I wrote about my grandpa. This is on my Facebook wall, so if you follow me there, you may have seen it already, but I wanted to share it with you here today. I'm here to tell you a story about Papa Tom. His life is a rags to riches story. He grew up very poor, and like many who experienced that, he became very focused on making more money, making as much money as he could. One year, the furniture store had its best year ever. He was looking at the numbers, and they had done so well that year, he had absolutely nothing to complain about. But he wasn't happy with it. Then he realized there was no number that would make him happy. Then he realized he had to change his focus. He cut back on the store's operating hours and took days off. He looked around, and his kids were already grown. They had started families of their own. So that's what he focused on. He focused on his grandkids. They had 6 grandkids, and when I was growing up, every summer he and Kay would take 2 of us on vacation. They showed me Denver, Washington, D.C., and Boston. They took me to Branson and to Six Flags. He came to everything, every concert, every school function, and he always made time to stop for ice cream. He taught me the best way to eat ice cream from the box is with a fork. He gave me my first taste of beer. He taught me it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn something from it. After Jesse and I got married, we lived in Milwaukee for a few years. When we started looking at buying a house, we decided we really wanted to be back in Missouri. So we came down to visit, and we told Kay and Tom we were ready to buy a house, and for that we were moving back to Missouri and planned to live in Springfield. Well, Tom was so excited, he launched into a detailed account of my cousin Clinton's entire work history. After about 20 minutes, Kay interrupted him and said, "Tom, they just said they're moving back to Missouri. Can we talk about that?" So we did. And the next morning, he took us to look at a house for sale in his neighborhood. We didn't buy that house, but we did move back to Missouri, to Springfield. And he and Kay came to our son's school functions and took them on vacation. After Kay died about 4 years ago, he got in the habit of calling a family member in the evening to chat for a while. One night he had called me and said he had so many stories and people kept telling him to write them down, so he was thinking about writing a book. Except he needed some help to do that. He didn't know how to get started. I said, "Papa, let's make a regular schedule. You call me on certain days, 2 or 3 days a week. You decide which days, and we'll plan for it. And every time you call, you tell me a story, and I'll type it up. And one story at a time we can do it. We can make your book, and I'll help you." He never called me again. Now, maybe the task seemed too daunting. Maybe there were parts of his life he decided he didn't want to revisit. We never wrote that book. But I can tell you, Tom's life was a story that went from rags to riches. Then it went from riches to treasures. And every time he told you a story about his grandkids, that's what he was trying to say. That's the part of his book he wants everyone to know. Okay, so there's only one thing left to do. I think like a scholar and spin like a baller, so hit the subscribe if you care what I holler, the bell and the like, and you'll show me some love. My jam is a poem. I don't ask for much because who needs a microphone? I have a hairbrush.